My name is John Tontat, and I'll be the host for your session today. In fact, it's a new webinar series from IngramMicro called the Consulting Catalyst. And what the series is designed to do is to democratize consulting capabilities for all of our partners. The series tackles a host of issues, including but not limited to IT business mandates around transformation, governance, compliance, financial, and ESG rulings. Although today we'll be tackling some thorny concerns around the current skills gap, supply chain challenges, and the softening economic conditions. I'm joined today by Fred Latala and Aaron Cox, founders of CloudLogic, and Howard Holton, the CTO of GigaOm, an analyst and consulting organization that we've partnered with. So what I'd like to do is start off today, gentlemen, if you can share a little bit of your background and experiences and what you bring to today's audience. Fred, why don't I start with you?
Thank you, John. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Fred Latala, and my background in the industry ranges from basically every element that you can imagine. So I've been on the consumer side, I've had resellers, I've had consulting companies, I've worked now for distribution, so I've kind of seen a lot of it. And today what I'm responsible for is the business operations of CloudLogic at Ingram, and really building out the consulting business and part of the Ingram 2.0 platform.
Thanks, Fred. And Aaron, a little bit about yourself.
Yes, Aaron Cox with CloudLogic, and my background ranged across time on the customer side and time on the consulting side over the years, with a strong background in transformation and enterprise architecture.
Thanks, Aaron. Last but not least, Howard, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm Howard Holton. I'm CTO at GigaOm. I've been at GigaOm 3 months. Before that, I was CIO and CISO for a large industrial manufacturing company. Before that, CTO for Hitachi Vantara. Before that, CIO, CISO for a legal services company. I've worked in every industry except banking and pharmaceutical at an executive level. I go back 35 years in IT overall. I wrote my first piece of software called Plead Perfect when I was 11 years old, specifically for law offices, and kind of got the bug. For those that are a little legacy, I got my IT start with Lantastic networks over ArcNet back in the day. Today, I spend most of my time consulting with customers on IT strategy, data strategy, and digital transformation.
Thanks, Howard. Fred, we'll start with you. It's been a year since you've joined the IngramMicro family, and part of the acquisition was IngramMicro pivoting towards a much higher end consulting capability. Help the audience, if they're not familiar, what exactly does CloudLogic do, and what's your experience been over the last year?
Sure. So CloudLogic, in the most simple sense, really is a consulting company that helps the end customer bring, a technology solution to business challenges or opportunities. So, a lot of people can say those types of things, but we focus really in 4 key areas. One is around enablement. So as technology is expanding and hybrid is really the rule of the land anymore, IT is happening everywhere. So how do IT organizations collaboratively work with that and get the most value out of it within their organization? So the days of IT having a stick and being able to wield it are gone. So we really try to help, our end customers do that. The second thing is really around what we call placement. It's making good business decisions using a decision tree to decide where assets, workloads, data are most appropriately sent based on what's important to the company. It's not just about technology, but it could be about compliance. It could be about financials. It could be a strategic direction. The third thing we do is really around migration transformation, which ultimately is a lot of our background. And we do this from very small to very large scale, but always with the mindset of putting the customer first and minimizing risk to their business as you make the transformation. And then last but not least, which is going to be really important today, is talking about optimization, traditional TCO, software license optimization, cloud cost optimization, finding that change in the cushions, finding money in an existing environment that can be leveraged for new investment, keeping the lights on, or leveraging issues with supply chain. So that's really, the what we do. The how we do it is a little bit unique. Our route to market is to co-sell with Ingram partners. We're there to enable an Ingram partner to turn on a consulting capability overnight, turnkey, and not have to spend the money, the time, or the risk of building one themselves. So by doing this collaboratively and working with that partner, we find that it builds a better relationship and actually expand both portfolios, both the partners and Ingram's portfolio, when we go to the end customer jointly.
I started the question with, it's been a year since you've been since you've joined Ingram. What are your observations and what were the surprises over the last year?
Sure. So, our observation is that our business model held. So we've been working with Ingram for several years prior to the acquisition. And, the route to market of enabling partners really was, a good thesis. It really held. Part of the reason of coming to Ingram, obviously, was the strength of having an Ingram, global company behind us, the ability to scale, grow faster. IngramMicro Financial Services being, second to none, that allows us to do and help partners with deals that, compete at every level, even against the largest companies. But we really thought that the SMB space was going to be just really where we were going to see the most traction. And it has happened, but we were surprised, I guess, that the largest players in the industry are doing the same thing. They're leveraging us through our powered by model because this industry is changing. The ability to have leading edge capabilities, to get access to skills, to be on the edge of what changes on a daily basis, as it were, and especially in the cloud, is really putting everybody at a disadvantage. So, from our standpoint, I think we learned that we needed to broaden our lens a bit, open up the aperture, because this need is everywhere. And then on the other side, COVID, the global situation, the economics in the world has shown that really the key areas that we focus on are things like supply chain, things like optimization, finding money, all those types of things. Those are critical. And it's really shown that the partner by using us, has a really important reason to be in front of their customer regularly. And I think as things are going on in the industry, being close to those end customers and having a reason to be at the table and talking with them is going to be more and more critical because they're relevant. So those would be some of my observations of the first year.
Thanks, Fred. Aaron, part of your core function is to engage with partners, the traditional reseller partners, but increasingly the role of MSPs. And can you share with us a little bit about how CloudLogic helps MSPs with some of the tool sets and some of the functionality that you've been able to bring to bear?
Yeah, absolutely, John. So one of the things that we've developed at CloudLogic is a capability around helping customers really understand their environment, both at the infrastructure, the tactical and architecture perspective, as well as how that layers in against how the business and the context of the business utilizes their technology. And what we found with MSPs is as they take on new customers, their customers often don't have a good understanding of their own environment or how their organization utilizes their technology. That creates a level of risk for MSPs where they may overprice, underprice, or underserve or overserve an environment because they don't fully understand it or have the information available to them to help them do that. And what we found over, especially this last year, is that we've really been able to work with quite a few MSPs and help them be able to go through that discovery process, understand the infrastructure, the applications, the dependencies, not only between infrastructure, but also applications and services, and then how the business utilizes them so they can structure their support and their capability very directly to the customer's needs and in a way that works well for both them and the customer and helps them be long-term successful as they move into that relationship.
Thanks, Aaron. I'll come back to you a little bit later, but Howard, part of driving a business in a data-driven manner is having the right information and assessing markets and vendors the right way. How does GigaOm help there?
So we're an analyst organization. And when I say those words, immediately a name pops into everyone's head, likely starts with a G. We are not a Gartner clone. And that's kind of important to understand. We are about 200 analysts strong. Almost every single analyst, there's probably 5 analysts total, of which I am one, do not work directly in the field on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, of the 200 analysts, about 195 of them are actively engineering. They're active members of engineering teams. So that gives us a little bit different perspective. First, it means the advice that we provide comes directly from practitioners. We have a product similar to the Magic Quadrant that I used as a customer called a radar. And our radar is designed to pair with a report called a key criteria. And if you were to take a key criteria and a radar, that would give you, the key criteria would give you the technical components for an RFP, where you don't want to do an RFP. And the radar would give you the ability to rapidly down select to make sure you had all the right participants in that RFP for you to execute against. And the reason that works so well is we do 2 things. One, we really focus just on the capabilities, the technical kind of side, right? Again, we're an engineering company. And then the second thing that we do is we completely ignore market share. It may sound a little bit odd. However, market share doesn't define whether your product's any good, right? And with M&A, and there's a pretty big M&A that just occurred, you can't really look at market share the way we used to in the past, which was, are they going to stick around and likely be the same company that I bought 3 years ago, right? So market share used to have some value. Even for me as in the C-suite, market share used to have some value. But really what we've determined is it shouldn't impact how you're rated how your product is rated, right? Your product should be able to stand on its own. And then second, it's kind of incumbent upon all of us to do the due diligence with whoever we down select to make sure that we're kind of seeing the financial side of the picture. And since nothing is static, even in best case, you may find that a big company gets acquired by an even bigger company that has a different plan for the trajectory of that company.
I appreciate that. And I will touch upon that acquisition a little bit later. That's clearly a hot topic. One of the key topics that we're going to dive in today is just around the softening economic outlook and around cost optimization. So Fred and Aaron and Howard, when you think about, as we're entering into a soft economy, what are your recommendations around what to do in and around cost optimization? Howard, you first.
Yeah, so I would get in front of it, to be honest, right? I'd really take a good hard look at where's my brown money going? Not my green money. My green money, I'd likely know where that is, right? That's all my active projects. That's all my investments. That's all the things that I would otherwise consider fun. It's also, green money tends to be the most painful to cut because it also tends to be the most in front of your customer, right? Whether your customer is, paying for your services or your customer is simply your end user. Green money tends to be those things that create a splash, that create some wow. They're also the most likely place that we're going to start seeing cuts. I would get ahead of your brown money right now. Get ahead of your brown money today, right? And start looking at where are you spending 7 times with the same company, right? Where are you in contracts that are less than ideal, but have been, maybe there have been in the past a little too easy to click the easy button and renew, and there wasn't pressure, right? Where do you have abandonware? Where do you have shelfware that you're still paying for? Right. I would look to really get in front of those things. I'd also really look at, what is your strategy around your data centers and your compute, and how well are you managing that? And do you have the ability to change maybe how you're doing your deployments and how you're doing your resource management that would allow you to sweat those assets a little bit more, right? You figure if you take an asset that was a 3-year lease and you sweat that for a 4th year, you've gained back nearly 25% of value. I say nearly because it doesn't really work out quite that way, right? If you could sweat it for 5 years, which I firmly believe, right? A lot of our tier 3 workloads could easily be sweat a little more than we're sweating them, right? Now what you're really doing is taking that same amount of money, right? And you're getting ahead of it and you're sweating it. And so when you're asked, hey, we now need to be extremely cost conscious, we need you to cut budget by 10%, right? You can immediately go with a plan and go, I'm already ahead of you. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm doing. This is how we're changing how we sweat, what we sweat, and where we sweat so that it makes logical sense. Do not in any way attempt to sweat security. Do not attempt to sweat security. Don't even, honestly, I wouldn't even accept it if someone came to me and said, hey, we're cutting your security budget by 10%. No, you're not. You're increasing my security budget by 20% because this is rapidly increasing, right? All the reports I'm seeing say that we're seeing a 300% increase in ransomware attacks, not a decrease, right? So get ahead of it, really.
Fred, Howard talked about what you need to do. Let's talk about the how. That doesn't sound so easy, does it? How do you, to your earlier point, turn those couch cushions upside down and figure out where those cost savings? What's the methodology that you recommend?
Well, I agree. Howard hit on a lot of the really great points. I think you have to look at a macro view. You have to look across the enterprise because it's not just IT spend within IT. You got to make sure that you understand where dollars are going and you start looking there. So first and foremost, you have to have a good understanding of the analytics of spend. So the procurement system, but not just in the traditional space, because you got to look at expense reports. You got to look at all types of other money going out because people are spending in budgets in different places. So we actually have some tools that we utilize and partner with some other folks where we can come in and automatically do that, correlate that spend and understand where, all of the spend to a specific vendor is happening. So, that's a very important point to start with is getting the data. But then when you get that data, you got to be able to rationalize it, right? And what we do is we start looking into some of the places that kind of Howard touched on there, right? Where do you have stranded assets? Where do you have underutilized assets? Where do you have duplicate functionality, duplicate titles? These are the types of things that can really help you, take advantage of money you already have allocated and are spending. The other part is it's not just saving money, but avoiding a risk, understanding that, looking at your licenses, understanding the utilization of licenses, software licenses, for example. If you're undersubscribed, then sure, maybe you can, get the economy or restructure that contract to get a better deal. Maybe you could extend that out a couple of years, do things like that. But I think one of the things you got to really think as well is if I'm oversubscribed. We've seen in the industry for years, people like Oracle, Microsoft. I assume VMware is going to be coming into this kind of mindset coming up soon as well. There's license audits. So if you don't know that you're going to have a problem, it's not a matter of just finding money to save. You could have a major problem when you have to go back and talk about the fact you just got a huge bill, right? So it's really getting your arms around that. But then it's the spend that goes in other places, right? It's the spend that happens with outside providers. It's the spend that you're doing in the cloud, be it a private cloud, a managed private cloud, public cloud, et cetera. But also, I would start thinking and looking at the return on the money I'm spending right now on projects, and I'd be really strongly looking at earn burn. Have we accomplished what we should be in for the money and that we've already spent on internal projects? And like Howard said, I would keep security in its own bucket. But beyond that, I would really start turning, the page over quickly and looking at initiatives that I have and seeing which ones are actually, wasting money or just, burning cycles that are not returning value. And sometimes that's part of your portfolio. You got to balance it, right? Sometimes you got to turn things off in order to use the money to go to more valuable. And that's kind of what I would do. So from our standpoint, That's what we do every day. You know, we come in and we help customers do that because unfortunately, I think a couple things happen when you're an end user, a customer. I've been there. I've run big IT organizations. I've been in, you know, these type of situations. Your people are very focused on keeping things running and doing the next thing. But a lot of the housekeeping falls by the wayside. And sometimes they just don't have the experience of having to go through and somewhat audit what's going on. So you really need somebody that can come in there with a good methodology, good set of tools, and can do it quickly and help you. So from my standpoint, that's the how. It's what we bring to the table. And again, for the Ingram partner, this is a great conversation because now they bring this to their end customer. They're powered by us. We get there with them. And again, it's a very relevant conversation. And you meet new people in the accounts because when you do these exercises, you're talking to everybody. You're having to talk to accounting. You're talking to business units. You're talking to non-traditional IT people. And those relationships are critical because not only do they give you insights, but you get credibility. And suddenly you're getting support for initiatives from places that you didn't have before. So that's kind of the way that we go about it, John.
Thanks, Fred.
I think I think it's worth kind of also, just as a final statement here, have a strategy, and a plan is not a strategy, right? You should be able to take every single initiative that you're doing or that your customer is doing and compare it to the strategy and see, does it accurately reflect the goals of the strategy? Does it accurately reflect the mission and vision statement that you've stated? If it doesn't, it's unlikely that it's then going to have an ROI that feeds back into that, right? You don't have to dig deep into, analyzing what is my ROI. If it doesn't fit your strategy, it's likely not going to have an ROI that's going to matter anyhow, because you're not going to be carrying the business the way you want to carry it, right? So really think about when you're going through those green projects, as I talked about them, right? Do these things really speak to your core strategy? Do you have a clear understanding of how they're providing business value, what value they're providing, and when you're going to start to see that value, and how much value you should start seeing, right? Just kind of a real quick, and if not, then cancel them or adjust them or transition them, because otherwise it's going to be seen as.
I think you're finished, Howard. Aaron, as you're listening to this, right, the discussion going back and forth, I want to get hyper tactical. So how exactly do you go about doing this?
So I think there's been some great advice shared here in these previous comments, because as organizations take the step into cost-cutting moves or opportunities to be able to accelerate the business in difficult economic measures, one of the first things that often happens are knee-jerk reactions or quick decisions that need to be made. But one of those issues that we see come out, and I'll share a use case here in just a moment around that, is if those decisions aren't made with the right kind of data and information available, those will impact the business and they may actually cost you more money in the long run. And so one of the things we recommend is really understanding, what do you have? How are you using it? How does it interact? And then what is the downward impact of changes to it? And so I'll put this into a model of a use case of a recent project. So we had a recent customer who went into a cost-cutting move with their public cloud provider very, very quickly. They had a mandate to move within 60 days. And so they started making very quick decisions without a lot of information around how they were using their environment, how it would be impacted by change, and started looking for easy wins to save money. And so they went through and they made massive changes to their compute environment that was supporting their SAP systems that ran their manufacturing lines, their retail interaction, and all of their revenue. This was an opportunity to save a significant amount of money, but one of the things was they didn't understand the downward impact. They didn't understand the dependency, and there were things about how they were using the environment with the business that was not clearly detailed and available to them to make those decisions with. And so when they went through that process, what they ended up doing was changing and impacting the way their SAP environment was able to share data. So the networking components behind it were not able to support the environment post those changes. And what it ended up doing was bringing significant outages and then significant effort to be able to quickly move that environment as fast as possible into a situation that they knew would work. So in the end, they ended up spending more money. Had there been a little bit more time, and when we started interacting with them post this activity, with this a little bit of effort to do the right kinds of discovery and be able to tie that data to a decision, they were able to find significant savings, where they were taking over $250,000 a month out of their budget within their cloud spend. And had they just taken that little bit upfront step, it really would have saved them a lot of time, effort, and business impact to then go still get the savings they were looking for, but not interrupt the business and actually empower the business to be able to do more with those changes.
And you have a tool that does just that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when it comes to tools, one of the things is making sure we bring the right tools to the right need. And so being able to map against the actual requirements, outcomes that we're looking to achieve, and the types of technologies that we're going to focus on in that process is really important. There are a lot of tools in the market. We have some that are very self-selected for specific situations, but aligning them to those situations is really key.
And how long does it take, Aaron?
We can start seeing results oftentimes within days. And then within a matter of a few weeks, we start to have results that you can start taking actionable activity against. And that's really across any size of environment, where that's a very, very large enterprise or a small SMB environment.
Thanks for that. Howard, I'm going to shift back. I think we're both talking about the same partner vendor in terms of analyzing vendor spend. But I wanted to give you an opportunity, from your role and that of a former CIO. I think the company is called CXO Nexus. Your thoughts about them?
I wish I had known about them when I could have used them. That's honestly my thoughts. I was an Ingram customer back in the 90s, and it's one of the things that got me excited about this partnership was because you all treated me really, really well as a customer. But one of the things that I kind of wish was a little easier is you offer a ton of services, and when I talk to my own partners, they don't seem to be fully fully aware of all the services, and this is one of them that I think is super helpful. Effectively, CXO Nexus will look at everything that you spend in every piece of data that you give them and tell you how many times you're spending, with who you're spending, how you're spending, and ultimately give you a really good idea of how much money you're wasting, right?
Yeah.
I don't know of a single global organization that is spending one time for their printers. They have one vendor they go through on one contract on one global agreement. Rather, they probably have 17 different places they buy from, right? I don't know one place really that's really good at making sure they only have one cloud spend. It is so easy to whip out your credit card and buy Amazon, right? And you may not think that your company spends enough at Amazon to get into an enterprise license agreement and start getting into discounts. You start adding all that stuff up, and really quickly, not only can you do Amazon, but you can probably do an HP, you can probably do a Dell or a Lenovo, you can probably do, right? And all of a sudden, right, now we're getting to that cost constraint again. And all of a sudden, without making a single material change, you might be talking about significant cost deltas that enable you to totally make up a 10% reduction in budget simply by analyzing what you have, analyzing where the spend is, and really consolidating all that spend back to agreements that make logical sense.
I think if Ken Mail was on this call, he'd be super appreciative of how you've described his company. So great job. We talked a lot about the softening economy, or at least that's what that's the way it's being described. But one of the upside of a softening economy, in fact, is there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions. We see that in the partner community. We see that in companies being acquired because valuations are coming down. Talk to me a little bit about what do you see as the partner opportunity as their end users buy other companies? What are your thoughts around the opportunity around that whole topic, Howard?
So if you're a partner and you hear that your customer is doing an M&A, the very first thing you should ask is, how do you feel about that? Right? And then the second question is, how aligned are all those tech systems? The likelihood is somewhere between 5 and 12%. Right? It's shocking if you have much more alignment than that. Even if they're both running Oracle as an ERP, it's not remotely configured the same, right? They're probably both running Active Directory. What's the likelihood that those are configured similarly enough that the integration is going to be painless? It's pretty low, right? And so really what I would be talking to them about is this is going to be a massive period of change for you. How can we help with those things that aren't core to your capabilities to help relieve some of that stress and strain, right? And dear Lord, if you have an M&A practice, if you have a practice that's designed around helping customers go through an M&A, help them do the cataloging, help them do the assessments, help them do the integration, you should be talking to your customers about it now. Hey, look, we're about to enter into a time period that traditionally is ripe for M&A. Regardless of what side of it you're on, we have services that can help with that. And I'd get ahead of that right now and today. I'd be having those conversations right now and today, and really make sure your customer understands not the capabilities you provide them today. They're well aware of those. What capabilities do you think they might need were they to go through an M&A that you are certain you can help with, right? And remember, you're likely also a fairly trusted partner with them, right? Maybe a very trusted partner, maybe one of the few trusted partners they have. Don't be afraid to say, we don't do X, Y, and Z, but we have a partner in our catalog that we trust to do that, and we're happy to help you when the time comes.
Thanks, Howard. Fred, I think you've got some thoughts around M&As, particularly because of your background. So I want to take a moment out and double click a little bit about your background because it's unique. You're an engineer. You've been a former CIO. You've owned a leasing company. What else am I missing?
Oh, I've written software, so I worked for a software developer. I've also had a reseller. I've had a consulting company, or several. So like I say, I've been around the table in every seat you could have, essentially. Howard's right. And the one thing I would put a finer point on is every Ingram partner has the capability that Howard talked about, and that's through the Powered by model. Because by being an Ingram partner, you have access to CloudLogic. You have access to this entire M&A portfolio. So the best time to get involved in M&A, I agree, is up front. It's in due diligence, because any type of acquisition requires really good data. And unfortunately, a lot of times in due diligence, people get an IT budget, but they don't really know what's beyond it. And they make some assumptions on what the economies of scale could be when you bring these two entities together. For very low cost, when you bring us in, we actually can go in under this NDA. We can do an assessment of that company that is being targeted, and we can actually bring back a very detailed list of information and recommendations and show where there is efficiency, optimization capability. But also, to Howard's point, by looking at the source company and the target company, we can do the compare and say, this is going to be hard, this is going to be easy, here's your sequence that you should go after. The first things that you can do are, you're going to want to link your email systems, for example, right? But how hard is that going to be? How disparate are they? And give a real good sense so that you have a better set of economics there. Now, if that sounds right, but it also sounds very similar. When Aaron talked about people like MSPs, right? Outsourcers, anybody that's going to take a workload under their direction in a contract, well, that's the same process, right? I mean, that's still due diligence up front. So we know we work with outsourcers. We know we work with MSPs. They always have to build a lot of contingency in for what if when they get the contract. So they have to build that in their pricing. Well, we're working with some very large MSPs right now, for example, and they're using our services for sales process. We're going in and we're actually assessing that target workload, coming back and giving them real data so they can cut that contingency down, and it makes them more competitive because they can now sharpen their pencil and have their price be more correct. So this all fits together very well. So from our standpoint, M&A is an amazing thing, to get involved in, because it's a gift that keeps on giving, because that will spawn so much spend, so much work, and it will build a much closer relationship at a strategic level within, all the entities that are involved there, because it's not going to be just you and the customer. Let's be, there's going to be a lot of, vendors involved. There's going to be a lot of, outside service providers, all of that. If you get in early, you can be at the table, and you can help direct that. And frankly, you're going to be able to go back to the vendors and other sources with a lot more power, because you're speaking on behalf of the customer, versus just being another one that's, in the procurement cycle.
Speaking of M&As, I don't think, unless you live underneath a rock, that the biggest M&A this year is not top of mind with a number of our partners, which is to say the acquisition of VMware by Broadcom. Howard, as you're listening and you're an analyst, you're in the business, what sort of opportunities do you think this represents to an average partner?
I think the opportunity is huge, right? I don't think the acquisition is the sky is falling, right? I don't think this is the end of the world. This is not remotely the end of VMware, right? But Broadcom does have a history. Broadcom buys products that are, whose innovation cycle has slowed. And if we're being honest, right, we've all kind of seen that. But I think this opens a great opportunity for you to go in and have a conversation with a customer about, especially a customer that's in an ELA, right? If your customer's in an enterprise license agreement with VMware today, it's a really good time to get in and start talking to them about what alternatives they have, right? Where are they at with their application modernization would be the number one place to start, right? Application modernization, we're talking Kubernetes, K8s. Right. So what are they doing with their application modernization? How are they planning on supporting containers? If they're doing that with VMware, there are better ways to do that today, right? That I would talk to them about. Traditional hypervisor, that becomes a little bit more complex, because there's nobody that I truly feel beats VMware. There are some places that I think compete and that I think bring a significant amount of value. But I would also caution that if they're heavily in the vSphere, vCenter ecosystem, right, then you're going to have trouble with a rip and replace. You're going to have trouble ripping them out if they've done a full NSX deployment, as an example, right? If they're using Orchestrator to a high level, that's going to make things a little bit more difficult. But I would be having that conversation today and go, look, how do you feel about Broadcom being the new purchaser, the new owner of VMware? Do you own any other Broadcom tools? Are you a Clarity shop, right? Are you a CA shop, right? Are you a semantic shop? Those things have value. And at the very least, even if they're like, we're super happy with VMware, we use Clarity and we're a semantic shop. Okay, what is your strategy in your next negotiation to really leverage the fact that you're a bigger Broadcom customer than you were yesterday? Right, and really leverage that to increase your pricing, right, your discounts. Otherwise, I really would be looking at, what is my strategy around virtualization, and really looking at accelerating, especially the application modernization. So it's a great kind of trigger point, and it's a great way to have that conversation.
Aaron, as you're listening, you're a practitioner day in, day out, advising. What's your advice to the partner community?
And so I think a couple of the things that's important here is helping clients be able to see what their long-term strategy is, because there's some really great avenues that Howard's offered here to take your enterprise as you move forward. But part of that's going to be alignment to what's your long-term strategy. Does your long-term strategy actually involve VMware? Does it involve that? Or are there tools that are structured around it that may help you actually move to your next strategy? Maybe that's a native and with a public cloud provider. Maybe that's another private cloud capability that you're moving towards. And as you structure those decisions and how you work that relationship with VMware and what it means for your customers' environments is a really important part of helping them make those decisions. Maybe there's some value in accelerating some of their public cloud transformation. Maybe there's some value in accelerating their transformation to Kubernetes or other solutions. At the same time, there may be an opportunity here to really double down and be able to bring more of the tools and more of the platform into play that maybe helps you with that relationship and what you're doing long-term from a licensing perspective, from a cost perspective, and the direction you're taking your applications and your application development.
John, I would add one thing, because I agree 100% with Howard and Aaron's perspective, but I think there's a tactical element that's really important here. It's understanding what you have. It's getting your arms around that spend, that usage, all the things we talked about before this, to make sure that when this inevitable conversation occurs with whomever, with VMware, with Broadcom, whomever, that you have the data, right? That it's sitting there at your fingertips, because you're going to be in a much better negotiating position when you know what you have, because I guarantee you they're not going to have as much data as you are. They're going to have contract data, but they're not going to have usage data. And that will be an advantage. And if you're an Ingram partner and you're the one that brings that information and you're sitting there at the table with that customer, helping them, they'll remember that. They'll remember how valuable you were, and they'll come to you, for, the future and what they should do. So I'd say it's a prime opportunity.
Thanks, Fred. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit, which is the second topic that, again, unless you live underneath a rock, every IT practitioner today is being impacted, which is the supply chain. I've been to a couple of industry events, and at every industry event, from a compute network storage perspective, their supply chains are reaching well into 2023. Howard, you're a practitioner. What's the advice? How do you get through managing your projects when you can't get your hands on gear? What are your thoughts around that?
Get ahead of it. I feel like a little bit like a broken clock, because I feel like everything I've said so far is get ahead of it, right? So get ahead of it and really diversify, right? Okay, I get it. You've been a Cisco shop forever. Cisco has some pretty good competitors, right? I have a firm rule. I have a minimum of 2 vendors for everything. I have 2 key partners, right? I have 2 suppliers for absolutely everything that I have. I have 2 clouds. Why? Because stuff happens, right? Market dynamics change. So look, yeah, if you're having trouble getting Dell, you realize if you were to talk to Lenovo, they'll move your first order to the front of the queue. Are we playing dirty a little bit? Sure, right? But that's kind of how that works, right? You're a Cisco shop and you need networking, FortiGate, move you to the front of the queue. Leverage it, take advantage of it, right? Really think about what is it that much more complex to have one site that's a Cisco site and one site that's a FortiGate site, right? Or Fortinet site. Is it really that hard to say, yes, I have endpoints and I have Dell endpoints and I have some Lenovo endpoints, right? Yeah, it absolutely is going to add a little bit, but when it's the difference between I can get equipment and I can't get equipment, sometimes that's really worth the effort. It also forces you to really think about what you do and design without building that vendor lock-in, right? If I know from day one I'm going to have multiple vendors, if I know from day one I'm going to have multiple suppliers, I'm going to have multiple interfaces, I'm going to have multiple complementary pieces of technology, right? Again, when it comes to software, it's a little different, right? But when it comes to hardware, then I also know I don't need to go to the level of designing for that vendor lock-in, right? Now I'm going to design so that at any point, I can likely replace any of those 2 and go with somebody else. And it gives you a bit of flexibility, and it kind of also breaks a bit of the calcification that you have within your teams that says, no, this is always the answer. This is always the answer. Why? Because that's what I know the best. Right? It really forces that diversification of thought, that diversification of strategy, and pays huge dividends. Also, consider what the cloud can do, right? We've now evolved to the point where desktop as a service is freaking awesome. And it is so much easier to maintain and manage than it was before. It's not the cheapest thing in the world. No two ways about it. right? But it is completely manageable where it wasn't before. And so that maybe gives you the time to go, I think we can now support BYOD. Why? Because we're able to control it all centrally using DAS, right? Desktop as a service. And all, that is the biggest day-to-day supply chain issue that you're going to run into is endpoints. Because the endpoint, everybody touches their endpoint. Everybody cares about their endpoint. The CIO cares about their endpoint. The head of manufacturing cares about their endpoint. The head of retail banking cares about their endpoint. They care about the thing that they touch, right? And so if you have the ability to say, let's shift to DAS, let's gain the control that way, that relieves our initial strain on the supply chain, right? And likely will improve the experience for those that are currently dealing with the lack of supply chain, and then go, and oh, by the way, we now have a BYOD program, knowing that it's really just to give someone the ability to buy what they can source locally and shift the supply chain responsibility. You get an A/B win back to back. And as a service provider, I would absolutely be looking at those technologies. If you don't currently partner, if you don't currently have a DAS offering, I would fix that tomorrow.
Fred, as you're listening about supply chain, what's your advice?
Well, I'll take it from a couple angles. If I'm a business owner of a reseller, a system integrator, Ingram partner, which I have been, I've been there, I would start by thinking about other forms of revenue, right? I wouldn't get hung up on, to Howard's point, I have to supply this whatever piece of technology from this vendor. It's constrained. I'm going to see my revenues drop. I would start thinking about being very creative, as Howard mentioned. I would start looking at other sources of revenue that, more importantly, are probably higher margin. I may not be able to replace every revenue dollar, but I could probably increase my margins and my bottom line by being creative. For example, services and consultative services, conservatively, they're going to be 10x as profitable as a product sale. So for every dollar of consulting you do, you're going to bring in 10 times more, margin as you would on that product sale. So yes, look at other ways of helping that capacity, freeing up the capacity in the customer's environment. You can do a consulting service to help the customer not even buy one more piece of equipment, but find capacity they already have. But you've just made a tremendous amount of profit and money by doing it. Moving them to the cloud, John Doucette would tell you right now that that's the answer. And I agree. John is our, one of our key leaders in our cloud business at Ingram, but he's right. Howard said it, right? But you can buy, any level of capacity that you want in the public cloud, and you could use that temporarily or long term. So if I can't get compute capacity, I could get it there, right? So again, but it has to happen. So if you could sell the services associated with that, and you sell the recurring revenue by selling the license for AWS or Azure or GCP, that's great, because now you got MRR, right? And you're locked in with that customer even further. And the other thing I would probably bring to bear, I said it very early on, is this financing vehicle. A lot of these transitions require capital. They require an investment. They require, money that the customer may not have available, or the partner may not have readily available to invest there. But that's where IngramMicro Finance comes in. Anthony Mackel is amazing when it comes to, doing deals. He hasn't it's funny, he says the only deal he hasn't done is the one he hasn't heard about, but it really does happen. We see, an SMB partner, and we've done this multiple times, compete with the largest integrators because they've got Ingram behind them, because they can bring that money to bear, and there's no deal size that is off the table. And with all the breadth of services and talent and resources, they look just as big or better. And they've got a $54 billion company in Ingram behind them, right? So, and that's not just in the US. I mean, this is a global kind of conversation. So, we don't even have to worry about borders anymore. We can make this thing happen in a lot of places. So I guess that from my standpoint, it's that creativity. You think out of the box, think about other ways of generating revenue to solve for that customer. And they'll appreciate you for it, because nobody wants to hear, oh, wait, we're delayed another 6 weeks, or delayed another 4 months. That doesn't get to your business challenge. That doesn't solve what you need, right? So come with solutions, come with answers, be proactive to that customer, and they'll appreciate it.
Aaron, help me reconcile a couple of things I heard from Howard and the advice that you give, right? Because when I hear about hyperscale public cloud, you hear about cost overruns, and so people get scared. But the truth is, there's a way to manage that.
Yep, absolutely.
What are your thoughts there?
Yep. So absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things I would consider, both, dovetailing off of Howard and Fred's comments and also into how to manage cloud costs is you're going through this process of avoiding either increased costs from supply chain or interaction from supply chain, and then being able to utilize the public cloud as an outlet. There are a few things to consider. First is prioritization. So where can you make investments that make the most sense, that help power your business, that may be a little bit higher cost, but you get the value of that to your organization? And then where are the places where you can reduce costs and either get more life out of your existing infrastructure, or be able to utilize public cloud services that allow you to be able to avoid certain investments that may be either very costly on-prem or very costly in the format you may be using them today. So when you look at the public cloud, it's not always a cure-all for everything. There are scenarios where certain chipsets haven't been available in certain regions because of supply chain. And so it's not the only option. But when you look at your long-term goals, if you're driving closer and closer to cloud native opportunities and utilizing those services quickly and easily, those capabilities will help you be able to reduce cost. And so when you look at how you may need to use the cloud today versus how you can use it 6 to 12 months from now, you may be able to show the opportunity where the cost savings over the same types of infrastructure investments on premise or in traditional technologies may not actually be able to compete. And that's one of the ways you can help avoid some of those costs, but also the opportunity to be able to get the most life and the most opportunity out of your existing infrastructure is also key as well. And that's a big part of what we do, is help organizations determine where can they get the best cost savings in the use of the cloud, and where can they get the best cost savings in the use of their existing infrastructure or potentially replacement infrastructure that may not be driven by supply chain impact at the moment. One of the things that we want to make sure that folks are very careful with is, really considering where there may be overpricing scenarios, where they may be competing for similar technologies that are really increasing in cost, and being able to use either public cloud solutions or on-prem solutions to defray that and divert their path that won't impact their business and won't impact their ability to do what they're doing in their long-term plans.
Thanks, Aaron. I think I'm getting pinged. There's questions coming in from the audience, and I'll try to divide it up between you, Howard, and you, Fred, and Aaron. The first question that came in is, can Ingram partners leverage CloudLogic client references as they're responding to teaming for RFP opportunities? Thoughts about that?
So one of the things that we've done with Ingram especially is we have an entire playbook that is available to the Ingram partner. And it has everything from case studies through sales materials, training, everything they need. So if you're going to respond to an RFP, I would say get us involved early. We can help craft that, and we can provide, the rest, any type of references that are required, but also we could probably provide some material that might be valuable in the RFP response, because content in a lot of cases is also very important when it's being evaluated. So I would say, just get us involved early, and absolutely.
This next one, I think, applies to both you, Howard, as well as the CloudLogic team. Overpricing, and I'm reading this directly, overpricing is usually a big factor with resellers. How do you address this situation with your partners in the areas of consulting? Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I communicate a lot, right? As a customer, I am happy to tell my partner, you are nowhere near where I need you to be. This is where I need you to be. I'm also going to give you a little trick, because this is something that always annoyed me. Just so everybody on the call knows, as a customer, I don't get paid a bonus if I spend under my budget. Just so you know, Like if my budget is 2.3 million for a particular project and you come in at 2.1 million, I don't get a $200,000 bonus. I don't get a $2 bonus, right? So really develop those dialogues with your customer. And if your customer says, I have $200,000 to spend, I have $400,000 to spend, I have $439,555 to spend, what they're telling you is exactly what the quote should be, right? That does not mean you can, if they say I've got $250,000 to spend and you come in at $265,000, they're not going to find another $15,000, right? You've just made it their problem. They're not going to be happy about that. The likelihood that you're going to get invited back just went down a little bit. Even with your best customer, it just went down a little bit, right? Because now all of a sudden you've become more difficult to deal with because now they have to find $15,000, right? At the same time, you come in at 245,000. No, thank you. Come in at exactly the number that I gave you and just increase like the value of the thing. If I'm buying compute, give me a little more compute. If I'm buying storage, give me a little more storage. If I'm buying a service, give me a few more hours, give me some training. You know what I mean? Really communicate with your customer and understand, and just be real honest about it. And just understand, look, what do you have budgeted for this? Because your budget cycle is already over. Now you're in spending money. You've already set money aside for this, right? I have no interest in being low. I have no interest in being high. I want to give you the maximum you can get for your dollar. What is your dollar? And just really communicate. And I've always been super clear with my customers. If you have a customer that you do a lot of business with, this is also a really good opportunity to talk to them about doing a QBR, right? Sit with them every quarter and just go through what do you have planned? How have we done up in the last quarter? What is your next 30, 60, 90, right? What does your next 1 and 2 quarters look like? And how do we make sure that we're in lockstep, right? You'd be shocked how much more business that you can get by doing that, simply by having the conversation and the customer telling you everything. And the goal is everything, not just what you think I can do, but everything. Because you'd be shocked how many times they go, oh, wait, you could do that? Yeah, we can absolutely do that. Oh, great. You'll save me a heck of a lot of work not having to go through, introducing somebody new or using a partner that I don't feel, as tight a relationship with. And you'll move really rapidly into that trusted advisor quadrant by simply taking those actions.
Fred, I'd like you to take a crack at that question, and I'll give Howard the last word. But
okay.
Yeah.
So, from my standpoint, we shouldn't start the conversation with discount. We should always start the conversation with value and make sure that you're selling on the return, because that is what's really important at the end of the day. With that said, Howard's absolutely right. You need to qualify. You need to know what the budget is. If that budget is $100, then what you need to do is you need to match scope to that budget. And that's where you can negotiate is the scope with the customer. Don't negotiate the price, negotiate the scope. But the other thing you can do is be really creative. And we do this on a regular basis. Expand the deal. Bring in other forms of revenue that the customer is going to spend. If they're going to buy products, say, you know what? If you run that product through us, we will give you X amount of services credits for that spend. Services credits can be very low cost to us collectively working together, the partner and Ingram, CloudLogic, et cetera, because we control that piece. But the nice thing about it is you can now say, all right, I had $100 scope of work. We just got $20 of credits. We now just expanded the scope of work and the customer didn't have to spend another $1 that they weren't going to already spend, to Howard's point. But you have the spend. So you're keeping a competitor out. It's a great way of putting your arms around the entire project, not just a little piece. And the other thing is, if you're traditionally as a partner strong in one area, by bringing us in, you can expand what you can offer that customer, because now you can go into all the other verticals around it and take this down. So from my standpoint, those are probably the real keys there. It's don't negotiate price, negotiate scope, and then be creative and try to expand a deal and sell on value. That's really my advice.
Thanks, Fred. I promise you, Howard, you get to close us out. What are the top 3 trends that's influencing IT buyers in 2023? And more specifically, how can you and the folks at GigaOm help?
So the top three trends we talked about, right? It's supply chain, it's contraction of the market, and it's people. I still can't hire people, right? The competition for good, strong people is still incredibly hard. Those are the three trends, and those are the things I would be paying really close attention to if I were you, and really, again, trying to get ahead of, right? You get ahead of these things by having a sound strategy. And that is what GigaOm does, right? Yes, we are an engineering company and we do focus heavily on the engineering, but there's a whole team like me, whole team of people that have that executive view that can help build an executive strategy that focuses on how do we mitigate the risk of those things as well as kind of everything else. So just feel free to reach out. The worst that happens is you communicate with someone who's been in the industry for 35 years and can probably point you in the direction if we can't help you solve the problem.
Well, gentlemen, thanks a million for kicking off our inaugural webinar series. I really appreciate your time. I believe the audience has your contact information and we'll be able to reach out. So once again, thank you very much for the time and the participation today.